At exactly 2:07 in the morning, Elena heard the hospital receptionist say the words that made her blood run cold: the surgery could not wait, and if the patient did not receive the required payment within the hour, the operation would be delayed. She stood alone beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency department, her hands trembling around a phone with a cracked screen, while rain hammered against the windows like someone desperately trying to get inside. She had already called everyone she knew. Nobody could help. Then, with nowhere else to turn, she made one call she had promised herself she would never make. 3 rings. That was all. On the 4th, the call connected. Elena swallowed hard and whispered that she was sorry for calling so late. She explained that she was at the hospital, that her younger brother Daniel had collapsed after working a double shift, and that the doctors needed money immediately. She expected anger. She expected questions. She expected the cold silence that usually surrounded Victor Moretti, the most feared businessman in the city, a man whose name people rarely spoke above a whisper because everyone knew the darker world hidden behind his respectable empire. Instead, there was silence. Then the call ended. Elena stared at the screen, tears gathering in her eyes. She thought she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But 20 minutes later, the hospital doors opened. Victor walked in. He did not bring an army of bodyguards. He did not make a phone call. He did not ask anyone to announce him. He simply entered the emergency department wearing the same black suit he had worn at the office, his rain-soaked coat hanging from one shoulder, his expression unreadable. If you believe kindness can exist in the darkest places, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the people who look the strongest are carrying the deepest wounds. Elena saw him standing at the end of the corridor and immediately rose from her chair. She tried to apologize, but Victor lifted one hand. He walked past her without a word and approached the billing desk. Within minutes, the hospital received confirmation that the surgery would proceed. Elena couldn't understand it. Victor had never been generous in obvious ways. At the office, he was strict, disciplined, and almost frighteningly controlled. He remembered every appointment, every contract, every mistake. He rarely smiled. He never discussed his personal life. Yet he had just paid for an emergency surgery without asking Elena how much she could repay. Daniel was taken into the operating room shortly afterward. Elena collapsed into a chair. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to cry. She had been Victor's secretary for almost 4 years. She knew his schedule better than she knew her own. She knew which meetings he hated, which coffee he preferred, and how he became completely silent whenever someone mentioned family. But she had never seen him at a hospital. Until tonight. Victor remained in the waiting room. He sat across from Elena, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the closed operating room doors. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. After nearly an hour, Elena finally found the courage to ask why he had come himself. Victor looked at her, and for the first time she saw something behind his usual cold expression. Fear. He quietly admitted that years ago, he had received a call just like hers. His younger brother had been injured in an accident. Victor had been 23, already surrounded by people who taught him that showing emotion was weakness. He had been away on business when the call came. By the time he reached the hospital, his brother was gone. He had arrived too late. That loss had changed him. Victor had spent years convincing himself that he did not need anyone. He built an empire, surrounded himself with loyal people, and created walls so high that nobody could see the frightened young man still standing behind them. Elena listened without interrupting. Then Victor said something that surprised her even more. He told her that when she called, he remembered what it felt like to sit alone in a hospital corridor with no money, no answers, and nobody coming. That was why he came. Not because she was his secretary. Because she was human. The surgery lasted 3 hours. During those 3 hours, Victor never left. He even refused to return to his office when his men called repeatedly about an urgent business problem. Elena watched him silence his phone again and again. At 5:41 in the morning, the surgeon finally appeared. Daniel was alive. The operation had gone well. Elena covered her face with both hands and began sobbing. Victor stood quietly beside her. She thanked him again and again, but he told her she owed him nothing. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Victor did not send Elena home. Instead, he asked her to take several days off. He told her that her job would still be waiting whenever she was ready. For the first time in years, Elena realized that the man she worked for had noticed more than her efficiency. He had noticed when she skipped lunch. He had noticed when she looked exhausted. He had noticed when she stopped laughing at the office. He simply had never known how to say that he cared. Days passed. Daniel slowly recovered. Elena returned to work, expecting everything to be different. Victor acted as though nothing had happened. But small things began changing. There was always an extra coffee waiting on Elena's desk. Her lunch appeared whenever she worked late. When Daniel needed another medical appointment, Victor quietly arranged transportation. He never mentioned any of it. And Elena never asked. Then one evening, she discovered something that changed everything. While organizing old documents in Victor's private office, she found a photograph tucked inside a drawer. It showed a young Victor standing beside a teenage boy. The boy was smiling. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten message, "Don't become like them. Stay kind." Elena understood. Victor's brother had known who he wanted his brother to become. Not powerful. Not feared. Kind. And somewhere along the way, Victor had forgotten. That night, Elena placed the photograph back exactly where she had found it. The following morning, she noticed Victor standing alone beside the office window. She told him that his brother would probably be proud of him. Victor froze. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he admitted that he had spent 15 years trying to become a man nobody could hurt. But somewhere along the way, he had become someone nobody could reach. Elena told him that it wasn't too late. That sentence stayed with Victor. Weeks later, Daniel returned to work part-time. Victor quietly offered him a position at one of his legitimate companies, not as charity, but because Daniel had earned it. When Daniel thanked him, Victor simply told him to work hard and take care of his sister. For the first time, Elena saw Victor smile. It was small. Almost uncertain. But it was real. Months passed, and the hospital became more than a place of fear. Victor began quietly supporting its emergency fund. He never put his name on the donations. He simply remembered the night when a person could be dying because their family didn't have enough money. Elena eventually discovered that Victor had created the fund anonymously. She asked why. He said he didn't want anyone to thank him. He only wanted the next person sitting in that waiting room to hear the words he had once desperately needed to hear: "The surgery can go ahead." Years later, Elena would still remember that rainy night at 2:07 in the morning. She would remember how terrified she had been. She would remember the sound of the hospital doors opening. And she would remember Victor Moretti walking through them without a word. People in the city still called him a mafia boss. They still whispered about his past and feared his name. Perhaps some of those stories were true. Perhaps others were exaggerated. But Elena knew something they didn't. She knew that beneath the black suit and the frightening reputation was a wounded man who had once lost someone he loved and spent years believing that becoming cold was the only way to survive. Until one desperate phone call reminded him that kindness was not weakness. It was the part of himself his brother had begged him never to lose. Daniel recovered completely. Elena eventually became more than Victor's secretary. She became one of the few people he trusted enough to call family. And Victor never forgot that night. Every year, on the anniversary of Daniel's surgery, he visited the hospital alone. He never brought cameras. He never brought reporters. He simply walked through the emergency department and quietly paid for someone's treatment. Because once, at 2 in the morning, someone had needed help. And a man who had spent his whole life being feared finally chose to become the person who showed up. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, hope, and second chances. And before you leave, comment one word: kindness. Let it be a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can reach a place in someone's heart that years of pain could not. Because you never really know what someone is carrying behind their silence. And sometimes, the person everyone fears is simply the person who has been waiting the longest for someone to remind him how to care.